You hear this term tariff war thrown around all the time, right? In the news, online, pretty much everywhere. But what does it actually mean when countries decide to fight each other with taxes? It's a huge deal, and getting a handle on it is essential to understanding how our whole global economy works.
It affects everything. I'm talking about the price of your food, all the way up to the stability of the entire world economy. Seriously.
All right, so let's get right into it. What exactly is a tariff war? It's not just about a single tax. The whole thing is really a cycle, and the most important word in that cycle, retaliation.
Okay, so at its heart, a tariff war is basically a tit-for-tat kind of fight. Imagine country A slaps a tax on something from country B to make it more expensive for its own people to buy. But, and this is the key part, it never just stops there. Country B almost always hits back with its own taxes. And it's that back and forth, that cycle of retaliation, that turns one single action into a full-blown economic war.
And you can really see this domino effect in action. It often kicks off with what seems like a simple trigger. Maybe a country wants to protect one of its local industries, right? But that first move, it triggers retaliation. And from there, things just escalate. It spirals, pulling in more and more products and causing a lot more economic damage than anyone probably intended.
Okay, so that leads to the obvious next question, right? Why do these fights even start? What are the triggers that actually set off this whole chain reaction?
Well, the reasons are pretty much always a mix of economics and politics. Sometimes a country really is trying to fix something like a trade imbalance or, protect a really important industry at home. But a lot of the time, tariffs are just a political tool. They're a weapon, really, a way to punish another nation, or maybe just to look tough on the world stage. The economic reason can sometimes just be a convenient cover for a political move.
All right, so the taxes start flying back and forth. What's next? Well, this is where the ripple effects come in. And believe me, those ripples spread way farther and wider than you'd think. They end up hitting businesses and people who had absolutely nothing to do with the original fight.
And this is where things get really interesting, because you see this huge gap between who's supposed to win and who actually loses. The stated goal is always, we're helping our own producers, but in the real world, the cost usually gets passed straight to consumers. Yep, people like you and me, in the form of higher prices. And at the same time, you've got exporters, often farmers or small businesses, who suddenly get locked out of their markets. They can lose their business, like overnight.
And the damage doesn't stop there, it goes global. These kinds of conflicts can actually slow down the growth of the entire world economy and create a ton of uncertainty for investors. Suddenly, companies are forced to completely rethink their supply chains, which is a massive headache. But maybe most importantly, it weakens institutions like the World Trade Organization, the very referee that's supposed to stop these fights from happening in the first place.
Okay, theory's one thing. Let's make this really concrete with a modern, real-world example. The trade dispute between the United States and India is just a perfect case study. It shows exactly how these economic tensions can get all tangled up with much bigger geopolitical issues.
So you can see that classic cycle playing out here. It all starts back in 2019 when the US takes away India's special trade status. That was a deal that helped developing nations get better access to American markets. And what happens? India immediately retaliates. Now, things do cool down a bit by 2023, but then, bam, a massive escalation. And this time it's not driven by a simple trade issue. It's about geopolitics, specifically India's oil imports from Russia.
And we're not talking about small changes here. These are steep tariffs, some as high as 50%. A number like that isn't just a tax, it's an economic shockwave. It's designed to send a really, really powerful political message.
And you can see the impact right away. This isn't just theory. Key Indian industries like textiles and gems, they take a huge hit. The value of their currency, the rupee, drops. Their stock market gets shaky. This is the tangible, real-world harm that these tariffs do to a country's economy.
And all of this really brings us to the most critical takeaway from this whole example. That quote says it all. Tariff wars are rarely just about economics. They reflect broader geopolitical frictions. You see, the US-India dispute isn't really about almonds or machinery. It's about global alliances, it's about national interests. And that's what makes these conflicts so incredibly hard to solve.
So when you look at all this economic pain and all this political fallout, you just have to ask the question, is a tariff war a game that anyone can actually win? And what does all this mean for the future of how countries are going to trade with each other?
When you boil it all down, global trade really comes down to a choice between two very different paths.
You have the confrontational path, the tariff wars, which almost always weakens trust and frankly rarely even achieves what it set out to do. And then you have the cooperative path, which relies on diplomacy and shared rules. That's designed to solve disagreements before they blow up, creating stability for pretty much everyone involved.
And that leaves us with one final and I think really crucial question for our time. In an era where global rivalries seem to be heating up, can cooperation still win out over confrontation? Or are we just heading for a future with more frequent and more damaging trade wars? The answer to that question, well, it's going to define the global economy for many, many years to come.